Vodacom. Power to you.
Well, hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special in partnership with Vodacom. I'm Fifi Peters. Well, when you talk about Vodacom, you're obviously talking about ICT. And for the next hour, we'll be unpacking the trends in this space, drilling into debate about emerging technologies, policies, and how South Africa stands in terms of its digital strategy when compared with the rest of the world. More importantly, however, we'll be looking at how to promote inclusive growth in this sector, such that no one gets left behind. We do encourage you to engage with us on social media as this debate unfolds, and the hashtag for that is Women in ICT. That's hashtag Women in ICT. At this stage, I would like to hand over to Matimba Mbungela, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Vodacom, the Vodacom Group rather. He is going to deliver the opening address.
Good morning to viewers and colleagues and people joining us at this special occasion this morning. I'm really honored as part of the Vodacom Group in hosting this session this morning. And more importantly, it's because of our strong belief in accelerating gender parity in the world. Obviously, you'll agree with me that Vodacom, as a leader in ICT, not only do we need to have debates on this matter, we also need to make sure that we actually encourage more discussions, as well as making sure that we enable the environment to ensure that we accelerate gender parity. At Vodacom, there are three key things that we actually do insofar as gender parity is concerned, and I'd like to share this with you. Firstly is that we've got a strategy that we call the 3 Cs. And what does the 3 C represent? For us, it represents what we're doing as a business to accelerate gender parity insofar as our colleagues, which is about enabling an environment in the workplace in making sure that our female colleagues excel in every little corner of their lives. The second part is about the community. We do a lot in terms of making sure that the community are actually having an opportunity to make sure that they have a better life using ICT platforms through Vodacom. And the third part is about our customers. As a business, we strongly believe that there's a unique opportunity in making sure that our female customers have a unique way of engaging with ourselves through our product propositions. The latest one is one which we call Siaka, which actually, the interesting part about it is actually enables our female colleagues or our female customers to make sure that we've got better information insofar as when they go on maternity, how to make sure that we give them enough information in terms of how they manage their stages of pregnancy. What is critical is that as ICT players, we provide information to all corners of society insofar as accelerating gender parity. For us this morning, I would like to say it's an opportunity to share with our colleagues in terms of how make sure that women in ICT take advantage of what we as Vodacom provide. And really, it's something that we're so proud of, and I'm really glad to be here with you this morning. And with this, I would like to hand over to Fifi. Thank you, Fifi.
Thanks, Matimba. Right, so at this stage, I'd actually like to introduce our panelists. And the common factor amongst all the ladies who are seated here on stage is that not only do they have extensive skin in the game with the experience spanning some 20 or so more years in the sector. I don't know how. I look at them and think, oh, wow, how is this even possible? You've clearly found the fountain of youth. You must tell us where it is. But they're really leaders and captains in their respective fields. And I'd actually like to start off with Fatima, who is sitting next to me. Now, Fatima Fatima Hassim is the Managing Executive of Products and Services at the Vodacom South Africa. She's occupied various roles at Vodacom since joining in 2009, heading up departments in marketing, services and product development. She's got a wealth of experience in strategic management positions in ICT, but she's extremely passionate about driving productivity amongst small businesses and ensuring that they make a positive contribution to the economy using technology. Sitting next to her is Charmaine Hoover, who is the Public Policy Director for Africa at Cisco. Now, Charmaine is responsible for supporting Cisco with country digitization programs and enabling the public sector policy reform across Africa. She serves on various trusts and boards, including as chairperson of the South African Women in ICT Forum, which works with businesses across the ICT industry and government to drive the development of women in ICT roles. In November 2016, Charmaine was named South Africa's top woman in ICT for her outstanding contribution towards advancing the industry in South Africa. She was also recently appointed as a member of the invitation-only South African chapter of the International Women's Forum. This year, she was voted MTN Woman of the Year in ICT, a nomination given by the Minister of Communications. And then I have Samantha Perry, who is the co-founder of Women in Tech ZA. Now, Women in Tech ZA is an initiative which aims to bridge the gender diversity gap in the tech sector. Samantha has worked both as a journalist and public relations professional in the sector. As a journalist, she covered ICT for the likes of Computing SA and Brainstorm magazine, where she was the editor. In PR, she has done a lot of work for multinationals such as Google, Telkom, MTN and Dimension Data. She holds a master's degree in ICT policy and regulation and is currently the Joburg agency lead for PR firm Irvin Partners. And lastly, it's Mickey Mashale, who is the managing executive and head of region at Vodafone Global Enterprises. Mickey joined Vodacom in January 2012, and she has served in leading roles across the ICT value chain, both in the public and private sector. In 1998, she was part of a government delegation to the Netherlands that looked at skills development for South Africa. I mean, Mickey headed the marketing strategy for Nextcom, one of the applicants for the third mobile license. She's got extensive experience on international markets, which she mainly picked up from her work at Ericsson, and this year she was listed as one of the top 50 women in ICT by Inspiring 50, a global initiative that recognizes leading women in the technology sector. So those are our panelists, definitely here by merit to come and address us about the landscapes in the ICT sector, where it's going, and how to ensure that we're all better prepared for that. So by way of introduction, I'd like for us to speak about that landscape currently in South Africa. So now, as leaders in the industry, and Fatima, I'll begin with you. So talk to us about that ICT landscape, the current trends you're seeing and where we're going.
So currently, our ICT landscape within Vodacom, we're seeing more and more women entering into that landscape. With the introduction of digitalization globally, we see that coming through in South Africa. South Africa is not going to be left behind. It's been the top topic around everyone about digitization. What we in Vodacom are doing are basically, how do we enable other enterprises to become digitized, not only for private sector, but also for public sector? How do we get government? We talk about government, health, education, e-commerce, everything is about digital platforms. And our role is to enable this here so that we would be able to have so that we'd be able to participate in the digitalization both globally and to make South Africa one of the leading countries within Africa.
And Charmaine, your view on the current landscape. Fatima has said that South Africa won't get left behind. How do we compare with the rest of the world, particularly at those in the emerging markets?
So I see that one of the big things that South Africa has sort of tried to get onto is the whole fourth industrial revolution. But I sometimes wonder, I think when Professor Schwab actually announced it in 2016 in Rwanda at the World Economic Forum, he was saying it's either going to be a time of great promise or peril for many nations. And I still see us struggling a lot in terms of various regulatory and policy spaces. We're still in that debate, which I think is a pity because we should have advanced quite far now. I think fortunately for us, where I see a take-up in terms of ICT is that the youth are getting more and more curious around what's happening in the ICT space. We're getting more and more girls who are rising up, and lots of advocacy bodies from I'm the Code to Girl Code, co.za, who are trying to figure out how do they then contribute to the whole digital agenda space. So you find that you've got more coding camps coming up. You find that there's much more discussions on the different types of apps that can actually be developed. We're starting to hear more things about artificial intelligence, big data, how these sort of aspects and dynamics start contributing. But once again, I think you're hearing a lot of words like partnership and collaboration, especially in the triple P space. And I think if we could move to the space where we start bringing government along with us in the journey, start including government in a lot of these conversations, because you find that the public sector and a lot of the youth and entrepreneurs are so much more advanced when it comes to this space, and more so a lot of the African countries. And I think if we can get government with us instead of trying to catch up with us, then I think we're going to start to see a lot of these digital hubs and innovation hubs and all of these great concepts that the private sector is actually driving. We'll start to see that contributing to the economy as well as to a lot of the communities if we really and truly are actually authentic about our collaboration and the partnership that we talk about, and we start to act in that manner. We'll start to see a difference.
Start to see a difference. Samantha, in terms of your view of how you're seeing the current ICT landscape, I mean, you've been writing about this extensively in your career, and also as a contributor to economic growth, how do you see things standing right now?
I think the South African tech sector has the same problem that the larger economy has. We have that dual economy thing going on that government has been talking about for years. So on the one hand, we have large companies like Vodacom, Cisco, Microsoft running massive data centers. We've got AI, CRM, BI, name an acronym, you can throw it at it. And a lot of people are using that technology in their companies. And it's, for us, considered, perfectly normal. And you've got a laptop and a tablet and a cell phone, and everything's connected, and you have fiber or you have any other kind of wired system in terms of connectivity. On the other end of the spectrum, you have millions and millions of people in townships and informal settlements who have mobile phones and mobile phones only. And if you had to start talking to a lot of them about BI or AI or whatever, they'd look at you and go, sorry, what? And the reality for them is that if they can access the internet at all, they're doing so on a mobile phone. They're often doing so on an older mobile phone. And a lot of South African companies still don't seem to have cottoned onto this. Go surf the internet off your phone, for an example of how mobile unfriendly a lot of South Africa's web is. And I think if we're going to transform the country, the economy, the sector, whether it's gender, race, any of those factors, we need to address that fundamental problem. South Africa is still running on two quite different streams where we're inhabiting two quite different realities, and those I don't think are any closer to merging than they were 20 years ago.
Very sad picture you're painting there. But Mickey, I'd like to bring you in as well. Your view of the current ICT space and its potential to alleviating some of the social ills, high unemployment, inequality.
I think more importantly from our side, we see it from a partnership point of view, because unless we're actually working with the government and actually even working with our customers, because at the end of the day, unless we enable their customers to be able to make sure that we bring in their communities, as Samantha was saying right now, we have to make sure that we actually reach out and basically bring them into the economy. There is nothing that we cannot be able to achieve. I mean, as much as ICTs are enablers, and without that partnership in terms of how we start enabling, bringing the tea farmers into the economy, bring in the cattle farmers into the economy and into the mainstream of the economy as opposed to leaving them out. So our approach is making sure that we actually partner government, we partner the enterprises to make sure that we're actually able to work together, because we have to be able to make sure that digitization does not leave the youth, the SMEs, as well as the mainstream enterprises into the future.
Yeah, definitely. And also, that just does not leave women behind. And this is a Women in ICT breakfast. So I thought that it's important for us to just paint a picture of where women currently stand in the ICT workforce. So recent statistics have it that women in ICT in South Africa only make up 20% of the ICT workforce. And that's versus an average of 56% globally. So the statistics are very, very dire. But before we get into how to address this, I think we should first understand why are we so behind what the rest of the world is doing. And perhaps, Charmaine, let me ask you, I mean, is it a function of the high barriers to entry created by men, or is it that women are simply not interested in the ICT sector, that's why they're not there?
So definitely not the latter. And I think, you know, so if you look at the amount of women, so I also have, apart from the boards I sit on, I also run a mentorship circle, which is aimed at encouraging young women to join ICT. Apart from the SA Women in ICT board, I've also started a young company called Afriel. This is also aimed at mentorship and encouraging women to stay in ICT. So I think from the young age already, statistics show that from the age of 13 to 17, a lot of young women already start to want to look for people that look and sound like them in the workplace. And they start to do that research around who can I go and talk to about a career in ICT. And often that's where the barrier comes in terms of mentorship and sponsorship. Because I think one of the things that our research has shown us is that mentorship is no longer sufficient. Sponsorship has to come with it, where you get to a point of opening doors, you know. So I think showing products and services and telling people how wonderful ICT is not enough, because a lot of the young professionals I actually bump into are still having this feeling of coming into a work environment and not actually, they still feel this limiting attitude towards women on boards. There's a limiting attitude towards women in the corporate space. And often when you delve a bit deeper into it, they often feel as though, I think it's something I suspect, I can't really put my finger on it, but when I'm in the workspace, there's this thing that I'm just not gelling with the leaders and males and females. So I think often what we find, the complaint from a lot of these young professionals is that often you find that the women are the hardest on other women than actually the men often are. You know, so I think it's got to be more of us who are sitting out here in front and more of the women in the audience who need to start offering ourselves up to mentorship and sponsorship and encouraging and opening those doors for women, because I find that still seems to be a barrier of every single woman that I mentor and that I speak to. They just don't feel that embracing. And I also think that, you know, ICT as a whole has not been made to be a very exciting space for many women. So we find that there's not many women in line functions. We tend to still push a lot of them towards the support functions. It's not where a lot of the exciting and interesting stuff is happening. So this is where, from a Cisco perspective, we're quite fortunate in that we bring a lot of the male engineers into the front space, taking them out to schools, taking them out to universities, and starting to amplify the exciting things that are actually really happening in ICT. Because I think often women are always the consumers of a lot of the stuff in ICT, and yet the ITU says that we are nowhere involved in the value chain that's encouraging the use of a lot of these products and services. And the ITU statistics say that gender parity will only be made a reality by 2095. Like, that's just laughable, right? So, I mean, that's not even my children's lifetime. So I think this is where I think these discussions are so valued, and a lot of the work that women are doing in the various spaces to support other women, I think, come in so handy in this day and age.
All right. But then, Samantha, for that very minute population of women who are simply not interested in the ICT sector, I mean, why should they care?
Yeah, I suppose not everybody wants to be a networking engineer, and I think a lot of women aren't interested in tech careers. But, you know, quite frankly, I am not interested in being a doctor. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I just have absolutely no talent or interest. For those women or children, I should say, who do have some sort of interest in ICT and some sort of interest in maths and science, the tech sector does very much have a public image problem. As Charmaine pointed out, firstly, we don't make tech out to be sexy. Nobody turns around to school kids and goes, you know what tech is? This is tech. This is cool. This is fun. If you can learn how to program apps to work on this, you can change the world. But everybody thinks tech, and they think, you know, large mainframes and white men in bad suits. And it's still like that 20 years later. I've been using that line for nearly 20 years, people. So we need to start at a much lower level. Firstly, we need to fundamentally fix our education system. I think let's just take this as a baseline given. Our education system is failing our youth across the board. So we need to fix that education system. We need to fix the perceptions that girls can't do science and girls can't do maths. And then we need to fix the perception that the IT industry is boring. And we need to showcase the female role models in there that are doing cool stuff. And the Women in Tech ZA website was started for the pure purpose of profiling local women in the tech sector to show girls and other women maybe who are looking at career changes that the tech sector is not just guys in bad suits, it's also black, white, coloured Indian women across everything from
heels.
CEOs, yeah, in very high heels in some instances, which with strength to you ladies, but I'll stick to the flats.
It's the cars.
It must be the calves. But you know, I have a friend of mine is an engineer who works on the square kilometre array. I've got another one who's also in engineering at Kuberg, all in ICT engineering roles, not mechanical or chemical or one of the others. And we're not seeing those women out there. Something like 50% of enrollments in science, technology, engineering and maths subjects at university are female.
Right.
By the time you get to postgraduate level, that drops to 17%. And by the time you get to the IT sector itself, post-studies, as you say, I think 30-something% of women in the sector in South Africa work in the tech sector. If you narrow that down to tech-only roles, just 23% of the tech sector is made up of women. So we're losing a lot of women somewhere along the way, and obviously STEM encompasses more than just ICT, but we're losing them at every single stage of the education process, and once they do get into the tech sector, they don't tend to last longer than 5 years.
Right.
So there's a lot that needs to be fixed. That said, it has improved. I've been presenting on women in tech publicly for the last 4 years, and it fascinates me now that a lot of the talks I give, most of my audience is male. So the attitudes when I started was predominantly women going, you know, help us, how can we help each other? I now have the men coming and going, how can we help too?
Right.
And I very much believe it needs to be an inclusive conversation. It can't just be women talking to women about diversity. We know about diversity. We're women. We've been facing it in our entire professional lives. We need to bring the men into the conversations. And as Charmaine says, we also need to be the kind of bosses who are raising male and female colleagues to be the kind of bosses that we would like. And I think that's something that's not addressed enough.
Right. So, Mickey, let's talk about this in terms of ensuring that the women that we do attract to the ICT sector stay there. Charmaine's highlighted the importance of mentorship and sponsorship, and Samantha's highlighted the importance of changing the perception, particularly that, you know, ICT is boring. In your view, how would you go about improving the retention rate of women in the sector, especially as it's so critical to economic growth?
I think, rightfully so, in terms of making sure that we demystify in terms of tech and ICT and make it so boring. Let's talk about what people actually see that is tech. When you see e-education, when you see what tech actually does in terms of enabling education in far off, in terms of being able to make sure that whether we have communication in that particular school, we are now able to make sure we broadcast and be able to make sure that everybody can be able to have a maths lesson, for instance. When you look at medicine, in terms of being able to make sure that operations are able to happen in far-end areas where maybe a doctor is not able to go to. That's what tech is all about. When you look at Uber, you don't know where disruption is coming from, for instance. So women have a lot of business ideas. So we have to stop looking at tech as this hard and difficult. But whatever idea that you have, you can enable it using technology. And you don't have to be a hardcore, I'm not a programmer for crying out loud, but I am in ICT. Yes, I might be a nerd in a different line. But at the end of the day, it's about what do you want to enable? Anything you want to enable is going to be in one way enabled by technology. And I think that's how we need to be able to look at it, because once you get at, I mean, I've got my little sister, her entire business right now is online. Mm-hmm. And not just she sells hay. I have a friend who actually started a database, which basically puts service providers in line with the kind of services that they're looking with their different customers. So it's not about looking at the difficulties of what is it that, I mean, in terms of technology and everything, it's about what do you want to enable and what difference you want to bring in. So once we start to basically talk more about the benefits and basically how we can start to benefit our economies and make sure that it starts to contribute to the economy, that's how we can start attracting more and more females into it and be able to make sure that we're able to keep them into the sector even much longer.
And thank you so much, Mickey. Fatima, I read some of your thoughts on the stats, and you take a glass half full approach to it. So you see the fact that we are underrepresented right now as an opportunity for women to come to the fore, show their leadership and excel in the industry. So as women now who are looking at that as a half glass full perception like you, how do you go about seizing those opportunities and also overcoming the barriers to entry to one day become leaders like you guys sitting on stage right now?
So I do think the opportunity that does exist and looking at it from the outside. So example, from my journey, I'm actually an accountant by profession, and what enabled for me was more about simplifying process and getting that. So how do I automate stuff, and using tech to actually automate things, that got me more into getting more into the technology world, using technology as well, and kind of seeing how can I simplify my life a bit better. So that is opportunities that we would use. And as a mother and as a working mother, technology has played a very key part in my role as one of my key support areas. So women need to see this here as an opportunity of how do they contribute in basically making things simpler, and by contributing towards this is actually participating in that there. And articulating this, voicing this here, it actually gave me opportunities to be seen not as an accountant, but actually to be able to enter into this technology world. And that is what I see, is that use these opportunities of being exposed to technology, and actually how would you be able to use it.
Well, seizing those opportunities. But let's drill in further into how external players in this economy can also help us bridge the gender gap and create parity. Charmaine, I mean, you deal a lot with government. So in the conversations that you have on the government corridors, are they embracing the disruption that technology is going to bring fast enough, to an extent whereby even their policy is being tailored around how technology can enable the implementation of, for instance, NDP 2030?
So I'm sure everyone in the room, especially my Vodacom colleagues, would be aware of the ICT white paper, right, which was actually, I think launched a few years ago. It actually got everyone in a total and absolute panic, because the ICT white paper was saying we're going to take back spectrum, and what we're actually going to do is bring new entrants into the market. And then a lot of the GSP players were actually saying, but hang on, we actually need access to high demand spectrum to start to go out into the rural areas and start to bring those who have been left out of the digital economy, especially women and the youth. And so therefore the white paper was not helping. And I think what was actually, I think, a positive spin from everything else was that for the first time it got us and government and everyone in a room locked behind closed doors for days and nights, trying to figure out how then do we get beyond this impasse? How do we ensure that we achieve the objectives outlined in the ICT white paper, which were very noble, by the way. We can't get away from that. The ICT white paper was saying we need to get communities connected. We need to go into the deep rural areas and also bring them onto the internet. So I think that the positive thing that came out of that was that we all got to sit up, pay attention, and sit with the minister and the rest of the stakeholders and say, how do we still achieve those noble objectives? But at the same time, how do we then ensure that we start changing how we actually work and collaborate with government? So that was a good tick. And I think secondly, in terms of the National Development Plan 2030, what I've liked a great deal is if you go onto Twitter and you actually look for NDP 2030, last week, Thursday, the minister in the presidency, Minister Jeff Radebe, actually took 37 young ambassadors from the National Youth Development Agency, and he's assigned them to each of the 14 outcomes. So there are 14 outcomes in the National Development Plan, and he's assigned about 3 or 4 of these youth to each of those outcomes. And the nice thing is, once again, each of these youth are actually entrepreneurs in respective fields, not just in ICT. They range across the various ecosystems, which is really amazing. So these youth are actually going to take the 14 outcomes and start to amplify them. And he's also gotten, I think especially Samantha was talking about the education portion. He's gotten the schools per province to come and start debating the pros and the cons of NDP 2030. And Cisco's actually been quite a strategic partner. So is Vodacom, and so is quite a number of other organizations who've been working with the minister since earlier in the year. to try and start to make sure that we amplify what's really going on with government. But I think more and more, I think government's starting to realize that you cannot actually work in isolation of policies, because we've seen with other technologies where policy has been written, but disruption has actually surpassed whatever technology was written there. And I think the unfortunate thing is, or maybe the fortunate thing is, once you find that citizens pick up on a certain technology or a certain application or a certain service, then they've got very little tolerance for a policy, especially when they see it's bringing value to themselves and to a community or to an education or a health system, etc. So I think there's a very fine balance between the two. And once again, I think this is where we as corporate, we don't have much of a choice. We have to work with government in collaborating and trying to see how we actually bridge the digital divide together.
Right, we're going to hit a pause there for a second to take a very quick break. When we return, we'll continue to unpack how exactly we can bridge that gender divide to ensure that no one gets left behind as we make our way further into this fourth industrial revolution. Well, hello and welcome back to the CNBC Africa special in partnership with Vodacom, where we're looking at women in the ICT sector, but also the overall trends in this space as we embrace for the disruption that digitization is causing. Remember, you can engage with us on social media, and our hashtag for this event is Women in ICT. Now, before we went to the break, we had laid down the picture of exactly where women stand in the sector, but now we're going to discuss exactly how to ensure that we bridge that gender gap. I still have my panelists on stage with me, and Charmaine, you did touch on government's role, you touched on the ICT white paper, but Samantha, I want to speak with you about government's position as well, given that you've done a lot of work here. Is there room for improvement, and how much more room is there for improvement from government side to ensure that South Africa does not get left behind?
So I'm going to try and phrase this politely, but I'm not known for being particularly subtle. Government has a massive knowledge gap when it comes to technology. The latest iteration of the Copyright Amendment Bill, for example, is trying to make hyperlinks a copyright issue. Hyperlinks are the URLs that connect the entire internet. If you want to impose copyright on those and say that I have to pay a copyright fee or I'm in copyright violation for using a URL with the name Cisco in, you break the internet. It's possibly one of the silliest things I've heard of. There's also, I think, the Film and Publications Bill, which wants pre-publication censorship of anything that goes onto social media. So every time I take an Instagram of my dinner, as one does, I have to then send it to the FPV for them to check that it's not porn. That's effectively what, hence my point that government, unfortunately, has a massive skills gap. And from a regulatory perspective, the problem for regulators the world over, this is not just a South African or even an African problem, is that technology is moving much faster than regulators can keep up. Any of the legislation that we have that currently applies to the technology sector, generally it takes at least 2 to 3 years to 4 to 5 years to get that legislation drafted, approved, reviewed, commented, and through the processes. By then, if you look at social media 5 years ago and social media today, the entire landscape has changed completely, and government was not up to speed then, it is not up to speed now, and they're still trying to regulate technology that they don't have a particular understanding of, And as Charmaine was saying, it's now also entrenched. If you tell me you're taking my Twitter away, you're really going to see a revolution here. It's
Right.
and government, unfortunately, I think the regulatory space in terms of how we develop laws in the information age needs to change because we're still regulating for the industrial age. And the way regulation is developed, the way it's put together, needs an entire overhaul because government can't do it fast enough.
Right.
And
If you were to give government advice right now on how to improve, what would you say?
I'd say get experts into your departments. Traditionally, your ministers and your deputy ministers have always been political appointments, and your DGs and your DDGs tended to be subject matter experts. And in the early days of the ICT sector, that was certainly true with the first ANC governments. In the past few years, and again, I'm trying to be subtle here, that has changed and things have become substantially more political, hence the current Minister of Communications. And the things that government is doing are not necessarily geared around people who have an understanding of the sector, looking at the sector and making decisions and going to industry to consult. It's people in the sector deciding what to do based on whoever's yelling loudest or whatever political agenda is being handed down to them.
Right.
Which is fundamentally problematic.
Right. So it would be get more experts into the sector. But let's talk about the private sector, and let's talk about the private sector with private sector players right now. So I was chatting to one of the service providers of technology to the private sector recently, and I asked him, are South African companies embracing the technology and the disruption that it is bringing? And his response was they have to, so they don't have a choice. So clearly it's happening in the private sector. My question is, how do private sector players ensure that they create an enabling environment for this kind of disruptive thinking? So in harnessing this thinking of innovation and disruption amongst the workforce, how would they go about doing that? Mickey?
I think one of the things that I think we always mistake is that they're actually doing enough. I mean, in my view, even the private sector is not doing enough. Everybody is aware of the disruption, but people are expecting disruption to actually come from their industries, for instance. The taxi industry did not see Uber come. And it was not necessarily because the owner of Uber actually owned any taxis. And if we talk, we deal with partnership in terms of enterprise and basically how we take them on this transformation journey. And every time you talk to them, yes, they know it's coming, but are they going to be the first ones to actually start preparing for it? Because they don't know where it's going to come from at the end of the day. So whether are they doing enough? My answer is at the moment, no. Do we know they don't know it's coming? Yes. Look at fintechs. Whoever thought that the banks could actually be working with the fintechs at this stage? Because there was basically those in terms of basically what are the bricks and mortar and how are they going to start incorporating people that are actually now giving you access to be able to do payments without necessarily even going and touching a bank in the first place. So unless we all actually start to say, I don't know who my disruptor is going to be, let me start to disrupt the environment before I actually be the one that disrupted. And not to dismiss the SMEs that are actually coming with the different opportunities. So what we end up basically doing is we say, how do you start bringing them in and basically start to create incubation of those different SMEs? How do you start partnering with them to start to make sure that you start to bring in that kind of innovation into the environment? Over and above that, different companies, even what we also do, you have an innovation awards that happen to say, wherever you might be in the business, bring in whatever idea, and innovation doesn't have to sit with particular people only. We have a process where basically we have innovation. Anybody in the business can basically bring in some sort of innovation, whether it's improvement to a process, whether it's doing something faster, whether it's about getting out to the market. Innovation can come from anywhere, about addressing the customer, about how we as employees work, how enterprises get connected to each other. So as opposed to just looking only at government, so what can government do for the community? What is it that we can start doing in terms of bringing that innovation and basically embracing it within our environment?
And I actually want to get onto what the individual can do for themselves now, but briefly, Fatima, as a small business, or aspiring entrepreneurs, in fact, you touched on it. You said that, is it your niece or your sister has got a business online? There's a lady who once told me that if you can't bring your business online right now, then you shouldn't even be in a business. So as SMMEs, how should they be embracing this digital technology, emerging technologies? How do they better prepare?
So, in order for SMEs to survive, I think it is definitely how do I digitize. SMEs, what we found as well, and Mickey spoke about it, it's partnerships that we as corporates need to get. So firstly, from a business point of view, we, as I said earlier, we will enable you. However, a lot of these SMEs are the ones that are actually coming up with the innovations, and they're the ones that are actually going to be the disruptors of the future.
Wow.
So like we said, is that as we said earlier, is how do we partner with this? How do we allow these innovations to come through so that we rather embrace disruptors instead of basically competing with them? They are more agile. They would be able to give us more insights. And those are the things that we need to leverage on for the SMMEs. For us, it is key for us to be able to make them productive so that they would be able to contribute to the economy. As we currently know that our economy is quite passionate in making sure that SMEs do survive, and we want to be there so that we would be able to enable them, digitize them, and make it easier for them. So products that we would look at is how do we look at a web builder and make it simpler for them to be able to basically create that online store. Have that online store that we would be able to do CRM with that there, social media marketing, and also for it to be cost efficient for them. You're not going to have a big corporate and not have the marketing funds that you do have to be able to do that. And those are the type of innovations that we're looking at, applications that we're looking at, partnering with other SMEs so that they would be able to partner with us so that we embrace disruption and also assist in enabling these SMEs.
Well, thanks so much, Fatima. At this stage, I'd actually like to open up to the floor for any questions. As Marius had explained at the beginning, if you could just stand up and state where you're from and also pose your questions. I think if you can just raise your hand, in actual fact, so we can try and get a mic to you. So there's a hand there and one over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Pamela Niemand. I'm the CEO of Executive Suites Group, an apartment hotel group in Sandton. I also run women empowerment programs in townships. And I try and create a platform for them to create their own businesses so that they can employ people within their communities. So the question is, how do we take this digital world to the townships? They don't have financial means to be able to afford a smartphone or internet access. So how could we do that to empower them to improve their businesses?
Okay. Thank you. And the lady
Hi,
over
good
there.
morning. My name is Snowy Matlango from Vodacom. And you know, I guess it's this woman thing. That's why women don't move forward. I put my hand up and I think, okay, why did I do that? But anyhow, so the question for me is, and we spoke about schools. So, and this morning driving here, I listened to Mr. Cochran. He was interviewed on 702. And one of the things that he said is that within schools, and specifically, Charmaine, to you, is how do we start making technology more practical in schools? Because we go to school and you have to remember and you write the test and then you move on. But we don't give the practicalities to these kids to enjoy and feel it. So how are we going to take that forward? Because I think that is, if we can start with that, that's a great start. Thank you.
Are there any more questions at this stage? Okay, let's just take the last one over here.
Hi, I'm Segri Vodafone. A quick question. I have 2 young daughters, and Charmaine specifically, there's great programs we have out there empowering little girls to take on tech subjects. But how do we bring it to the high schools where students are choosing subjects? Example, I have a daughter who was in grade 10, and she's one of 3 girls in a class of 30 boys choosing a tech subject. How we can start making the subject more sexy to these young girls? Yeah.
Okay, let's answer those first round of questions on Charmaine. If you can just pick up on making technology more practicable or in schools, and also empowering young girls, particularly in high
so
school.
maybe also just taking it a step back in terms of the townships, right? I think there are some amazing programs that the Premier, I know, of Gauteng has actually embarked upon in TSEPA 1 million. So if you Google TSEPA 1 million once again, Cisco is a partner in there, and there's various other partners from various other economies and sectors who are actually involved in SEPA 1 million, and this is going out, and he's got the whole program. The Premier's got this whole program to go out and revitalize the township economies, and I know that there's Investec, there's so many other organizations who are backing him up and trying to make this possible and plausible. So I think for anyone who's in the township, and we have the infrastructure challenges we have the broadband challenges that we have, for me, my first port of call would be to go out and seek the relevant innovation hubs that are in the township and that are sprouting out a lot. I know Ericsson, for example, has just launched also the Whatnot Trust. That's also in one of the townships out there. That's a quick win. Instead of waiting for various organizations to go out and start laying this cable, because there's so many debates around who's going to be the broadband provider of choice and when are they going to be the broadband provider of choice. In the meanwhile, things are actually getting much, much worse. So that would just be some quick advice from me, is to try and link up to something that's already out there. And I come back again to my point in terms of the schooling system. For me, it's less of a technology issue than more of an education system, and how the education system is actually currently structured. And I know from a Cisco perspective, in partnership with Vodacom, I know Vodacom does so much teacher training, and we've gone out and we're working with the Departments of Higher Education and Training. We're working with a lot of the FET colleges. We're also working with the Departments of Basic Education, trying to influence the curriculum, because it's really a curriculum issue. And I think Samantha said it, we're still in the industrialization age, where we've got children seated in rows, and where you're still telling kids a lot instead of the interaction stage that a lot of the other countries globally have actually moved on to. So I think it's more that issue of how do we start to influence the curriculum, which we're trying really hard to do. We really and truly are appealing to government to try and figure out how do we partner and collaborate to try and influence that curriculum, to try and it's the whole teaching process rather than just giving devices, because we saw that the whole one laptop per child device didn't work, and I think it was because it was not structured on the correct, delivery method, because the delivery method is important. Where you find certain schools don't teach, they allow kids to collaborate, they allow kids to partner in school, they do a lot of that sort of brainstorming, and then a lot of the research is done outside of the school back home. And I think that's something that needs to change. And I think when you look at, once again, I come back to my point, research indicates that we lose a lot of young girls between the age of 13 and 17 years old. Because that's when, as girls, we start realizing that actually we're a little bit pretty. We are actually a little smarter than boys. Boys actually smell a bit worse than we actually do. So I think that's when we start losing these girls, because they become very aware of themselves. And if you ask girls between the age of 13 and 17, are you a nerd? They take such huge offense to that. They're like, oh goodness, no, I'm not. I'm not a nerd. I don't want to do maths and science. That's not what I'm interested in doing. And I think once they start getting role models like us, who come from the townships, I come from a township in Wentworth, very poor community, and I think the more I go back there and the more I start encouraging these young girls and talking to them, and the whole mentorship and the girls in tech and, Girl Code and I'm the Code, and all of us start getting on programs that many of you have running. We sign ourselves up to these programs to mentor and sponsor. That's where we start showing these young girls that it is possible to wear very, very high-heeled shoes and still be in tech and still be a nerd, as Mickey says, but still, it's fine. And I think it's those notes of encouragement, because girls want to see women who look like them and sound like them in the respective spaces for them to hang on to maths and science.
And also women who wear flat shoes, who prefer the flat shoes, like Samantha. There's also a place for you there. But then, Samantha, in terms of the education, does it all boil down to a strong emphasis on maths and science? And particularly, we're talking about young girls and making sure that they go about the right way. As parents, we've got a very, very big responsibility in ensuring that this happens. And especially, many say that, the jobs of the future haven't even been created yet. We don't even know what they look like. So, how do you even prepare for jobs that you don't even know what they look like? Does it all boil down to maths and science and ensuring that one is able to easily adapt?
It doesn't boil down to maths and science. I failed maths in standard 7, which I think would be grade 8 or 9 now. And I have a telecoms master's. So, I'm living proof that you do not need maths to get into the tech sector, or science for that matter. I won't discuss my science scores. So I work with a company called Clever, which does artificial intelligence that augments humans. And the co-CEO, Ryan, is fond of saying, the education system is fundamentally flawed because we teach people to know things. We don't teach them to do things. And with technology in particular, you need to be on the technology, engaging with it. Another one of the journalists I used to work with was fond of complaining that his 2-year-old picked up the new smartphones he was reviewing and learned to operate them faster than he did. Said 2-year-old not being able to read. But the 2-year-old can pick up the patterns and understand and make it work. And if you expose kids to that technology, you don't necessarily need to be teaching them, you know, pure play math or pure play science, although obviously if you're going into engineering, that would be a thing that you need to know. But to get people involved in the tech sector and to get digitization to happen across all sectors of the economy, people just need to have access to and to be able to use technology. Prices, both of handsets and data and voice, need to come down if we're going to get them into the townships. They absolutely have to. And people need more access to free resources. Google, for example, has a program called Digital Skills for Africa, which is a set of 80 courses available in 5 languages online. It's optimized for feature phones, and it's optimized for low bandwidth environments. Why are not more private sector companies doing that? You guys have got the skills. Khan Academy, Code Academy. You can pretty much put yourself through any degree you like online these days. How many of you offhand know about those things? Are you immersing yourselves in the online world enough to know that? And if we're not aware of everything that's going on with access to our education, our resources, company intranets, what are people in the townships and in less resourced areas seeing? Nothing. And all of these free resources, if you're an SME, Google again, Gmail, Google Docs, calendaring, all that stuff. You can run a business on Gmail free. Once you get a bit bigger, you might want to pay them for it because the service gets better. But all of these resources are there. All we need to do is show people how to use any kind of smartphone and tablet and make those affordable enough that they can actually access them.
All right, affordability being key there to increase access. Are there any more questions from the audience? Nothing. Oh, there's a hand over there.
Hi, I'm Dumi Mapota from Vodacom EBE Finance. So I've attended many forums such as this, and many women make the mistake that women empowerment means fighting against the men when we get back to the office. And there is such a big opportunity to actually start building male change champions in our environments. And I think there is a gap there. There is an opportunity for us to take the people who are currently dominating this space and equipping them to help us get up to the levels that we need to reach. What are we doing? And is that a focus? Are we so, entwined with the women empowerment and what are we doing in that sort of world?
Mickey, I saw you nodding there quite honestly. Would you like to take that?
I think over and above the fact that there used to be legislation that basically has to make sure that from an equity point of view, we start to get to those, I think we took it more as part of our strategy and made it basically so that women have to be part of the leadership. And we also make sure that we don't just always choose from the same pool of people so that we are able to spread, because there's nothing worse about the same people are always basically getting only access to these kind of opportunities, but making sure that we start to create that pipeline of people. So those are the kind of things that we need to be doing, where it's not about looking at the same people all the time, it's making sure that we always have this pipeline of women that we are building to make sure that into the future we have more people coming in. Women in ICT or even in technology is more like even leadership in terms of women in leadership. We have to make sure we start to build that pipeline right across the different bases, because a leader does not necessarily have to be somebody only the CEO. You can be a leader at whatever level. Whatever you're doing, make sure that you start to bring the people with you and enable their environment as well.
Exactly. I'd like for us to get into some closing comments, because I do understand we have got around 5 minutes, and I'd like to begin with you. 4 minutes. My director has just told me, so not a lot of time. Can we just make everything brief? To give the ladies who have joined us here and some men key takeaways to go home with, to ensure that this is not just like any other forum of women and ICT that they have been to, but to ensure that they go away with something that will enable them to go on that journey of becoming innovators and leaders, particularly here in the ICT space. Fatima.
So for me, it is about leadership for women. is to persevere. And just to the question before, it's not about always fighting in the boardroom, and basically hard work, perseverance, that's what gets you through. And ICT and technology, it's innovative, it's fast, it's changing, and it's fun. So it's, although all the hard work and perseverance does come through, it is a fun environment that you need to get into. And the diversity that us as women offer, that brings the innovation and the change. And we can see that they're happening within companies, both globally and in South Africa, is what women are bringing to the sector. I mean, if you look globally, Sheryl Sandberg, what she has done, and there's qualities that we have, like empathy as well, that actually we can bring into the boardroom and kind of contribute to the men that would be the, what did you call it, the men changers of the world. And basically, that is what we would be able to contribute.
Right. Charmaine?
So I think from my side, for everyone in the audience, I think it's very simple. Just get involved with something. Take up a course, be it in your community, be it in the organization. You know, and I also think, you know, our very own Sis Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka started the whole He for She change. And I think that movement for me is so important, because you'll be amazed at how many of your male colleagues want to get involved. So I today am having a whole group of a certain banking company over at our organization where I'm training, and there's many of the male engineers who are coming to actually collaborate with us and a few females. Next week sometime, we've got another big group coming over, and it's always the male engineers who are always the first to say, Charmaine, how can I help you? Do you need me? Is there anything I should provide? So I think if you just do one thing, you'll be amazed at how many people put up their hands. So often I think people don't want to lead, but they're always very willing to get on board and actually follow or collaborate. So I think if you can just do one thing, then by all means do that. And if you want to actually figure out how to start this, reach out to me. I'm on social media. You can Google Afriel or even Cisco. And I'm really, really and truly willing to help you to see how you can actually start that path in terms of doing something towards the course.
Samantha?
Yeah, I suppose to go back to the making men change champions, I think it was you said, that's where it has to start. Diversity has got to be an inclusive conversation. We can't be, as a woman, leaving the men out of it. So if you're a woman in tech, please reach out to the men in tech around you. If you're a man in tech, or even not in tech, just, you know, ask the woman, what can you do to help? Or, you know, as Charmaine says, get involved in something.
Anything.
Anything, really.
And Mickey?
I think to go back to my first statement, it is still going to be about partnership. With the kind of problems that the world is facing today, a different kind of leaders are actually required, and those are women. So we, the women, have to actually stand up and to make sure that we basically take on the battle ahead. I think, as Fatima said, we bring a lot of qualities. We bring in that sensitivity. It's not only about making the enterprise successful on its own. It's about also ensuring sustainability within that. And only the, maybe not only the women, but I think making sure that the women are actually part of that leadership in terms of what the world actually requires going forward. ICTs are going to enable each and every industry, and we have to make sure that we start driving that as the women and bringing the girl child alongside that.
A very powerful note to end it on, highlighting the challenges that the world is currently facing right now and the enablers for change being a woman. Thank you so much for giving us your insights and for definitely enabling us and showing us exactly how we can use ICT to step forward. That is where we are leaving this panel discussion for today. Thank you so much for engaging with us on social media, and a big thank you to our audience members as well as Vodacom for giving us this platform to unpack all these things. This is where we do end it for the CNBC Africa special broadcast. Thank you so much for watching.